take a week off, and it seems like an eternity. But we're back with Medtech Crossroads. It is the month of June. So good to be back with you. Yeah, how do hurricanes and medical devices correlate? I feel like the whole COVID pandemic got people thinking. It actually got people thinking. We'll see how long this lasts before everyone gets back into their rut. But FDA is actually thinking about the relationship between hurricanes and medical devices. And I honestly think they did a pretty good job thinking about it, and we're going to talk about some of that today, as well as anything else that comes up on Medtech Crossroads. All right, I want to remind you, if you have questions or comments, if you're in the Zoom room at the end of the show, you are welcome to raise your hand in the Zoom room. We'll also monitor the YouTube live stream if you want to ask a question or tell us about an event. Part of our job here is to just keep the community interconnected, right? So many great organizations doing so many great things to keep the community connected, trying to do our part too. But if you have a question, maybe that's bigger or longer term, or you want to send something to us, contact at medtechcrossroads.com. You're welcome to reach out to us there. And speaking of organizations doing cool things, as we pull events and try to tell you about what's happening in the ecosystem, folks like MichBio, the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, Project Medtech, Ann Arbor Spark, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, drawing from any number of those sources for these events that we're announcing. I want to remind you, before we talk about the events, I want to remind you that we have 2 new playlists up on YouTube. One of those is the How Do I Get a 510K playlist. So many people want to know what the basics are of getting a 510K, and if we go to the iPad for just a second, you can see that playlist. You'll be able to access that through the links from the YouTube page. So if you're on YouTube from today's episode, you can get down to the How Do I Get a 510K playlist. There's 4 episodes there that we did, I think it was last year. So like nearly 4 hours of content all about 510Ks and how do I get 510Ks. Another one that I'll just mention to you as well is the De-Risking Medical Device Development series that we also did about a year ago, along with case studies and all sorts of things. People think, oh, where's the checklist? How do I do the checklist to get my medical device cleared by FDA? But of course, nothing could be further from the truth. It's really about de-risking. It's really about de-risking the development process until finally you're across the finish line because all the risks have been eliminated. So I wanted to tell you about those 2 things. Let's go next to the news and tell you what is happening, rather upcoming events. The first one, the REDI conference, coming up June 5th through 9th in 3 different tracks: a CDER, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research track, CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health track, and CBER, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Those 3 tracks are available in 2-day chunks. If you happen to be a regulatory affairs professional, you can get credit for this conference. But if not, it's certainly a deep dive with FDA, talking about these different divisions at FDA and how to navigate them. And just to keep it confusing, the RESI conference is happening almost exactly the same days. This is more partnering between investors and startups. But the RESI conference happening in Boston June 5th, but happening virtually June 6th through 7th. So if you're a startup or an investor in need of deal flow, that would be a great place to show up. Link in the YouTube video from today. The Ann Arbor BioSocial, I got a note from Matthew Hines directly saying, oh, come to this one. This one's going to be big. They are shooting for about 150 people at the A2 BioSocial at Palio in Ann Arbor, Tuesday, June 6th, 5 p.m. Planning to be there at the A2 BioSocial, big end of season one for them. I don't know if it continues through the summer. It may not continue through the summer, but this was the end of the 2022 through 2023 A2 BioSocial, trying to get that back to a real big in-person event. Into being sponsored, one of the last ones of those before the pandemic. And I think it must have been 80, 90, 100 people there. It was really buzzing. Then, of course, COVID came along, sort of shut things down. But Matthew has been diligent, along with his partners, for bringing that event back. And sounds like they're really expecting a big one this coming Tuesday. Well, the FDA Science Forum, and this one's going to be interesting. I believe I'm going to be traveling, but I'm going to try to tune in for this one. 2 days of regulatory science in a whole bunch of different areas. We've told you before that FDA has divisions that think about how to do regulation, and this is all about how they are thinking about regulation in different areas. So straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, this is the place to go, June 13th and 14th. Been talking a lot with Dwayne Mancini from Project Medtech, and this Midwest Showcase is shaping up to be a big event, August 30th in Cleveland, Ohio. Quite a few folks you know who will be there. Might be a good one to make a little road trip. Get out on the highway. So that is happening. Project MedTech Midwest Showcase, Cleveland, Ohio, August 30th, 2023. And from our friends at MichBio, the Life Sciences Showcase is happening September 18th in Lansing, Michigan. You can register for that. Should be a great event where they're combining life sciences, medtech, and a few other domains to talk for a wonderful in-person event. So we'll look forward to being at that come September. It seems not good that we're thinking about September already, though. I feel just a little bit guilty, Steve, having this slide up here. Like, let people get through the summer and then tell them about back to school.
Do you think it's a little too early for that? I mean, I suppose today's the last day of school for a lot of elementary and high schoolers.
Yeah, coming June here, right? Like, what on earth? I don't know. I want summer to be here and not be already gone. That's the thing that I'm wrestling with today. Well, next up, we're going to tell you all about FDA and industry news. Got a bunch of items from FDA, including hurricanes. Let's go there next. 5 ways that hurricane season could affect your medical device. That almost sounds like clickbait, doesn't it? I mean, like that's pretty extreme. What do hurricanes have to do with medical devices? But I think you can see the relationship, right? And I'm actually a fanboy here. I'm a little bit proud of FDA for actually thinking about this, because as we're going to talk about today, this is going to come down to the level of when you're designing a medical device or thinking about your customer base or talking to your investors about what you're going to do. We often tell people to think about the MAUD database, adverse events, what can go wrong. When you design your device, you're supposed to design it for what is called reasonably foreseeable misuse. Now, hurricanes would not be considered reasonably foreseeable misuse in most contexts. But it does remain the case that natural disasters are a part of life. And FDA has put some thought down about how to think about your medical device, whether you're a hospital that's trying to keep these devices usable, or whether you're a developer thinking about what should I account for when I'm designing this device. So, ironically, what we have here is actually some really good thinking for both contexts, healthcare. How can we be ready for natural disasters? But also, medical device developers, hey, what kinds of information should we include that would make life easier when a natural disaster hits? And maybe it doesn't up what we have to do that much. It's just something to add into our thought process. But it's interesting either way. Here are the folks that they think would be affected by this, right? Healthcare providers, medical device manufacturers, and distributors. What are they recommending for each of these? Well, general recommendations: figure out your partners. Have that in place ahead of time for when something like this could happen. What is the potential impact of a hurricane on your supply chain? That's something that's going to be different for every entity, the potential impact. Stockpiling. Well, that's lovely. I do have to say, I feel like this is something that, call me a little bit calloused at this point, but we often don't think very far ahead, right? So as a nation, we often won't think too far ahead. Stockpiles have a way of needing to be depleted because somebody realizes they're spending money on it, and then, 3 years later, no one seems to care. So give them credit for bullet point number 3 there, but it's probably better to think about partners' potential impact. So all of the preparations can be in a plan, right? There's a plan, dust the plan off when the time comes. Looking at alternative mechanisms for ordering, receiving, and tracking supplies. Again, credit for thinking about this, but people don't maintain those sorts of things, right? Just in a vacuum. They need a reason to. So some of this is aspirational, but some of it I think is good to be thinking about. Healthcare providers, a list of things to think about. Medical device manufacturers, a list of things to think about. Distributors, a list of things to think about. If you're one of those, this wouldn't be a bad page to just take a look at. But what I want to take you to a little bit more directly is this document right here. FDA offers tips about medical devices and hurricane disasters. This is the one I was surprised to find because it was like, wow, FDA is actually thinking about this. So let's take a look down the page here. There's 5 areas that they note. One of those is power outage. Yep, that makes sense. Certainly happens. I was shocked during COVID to find out, talking to some major hospital systems, about internal resources. And it turns out that in one case, and won't be talking about who, they were down to, I think it was their last air compressor during COVID. Had 3 nominally, down to their last one, supplying hospital air. Well, that would have been an absolute nightmare if that last one had gone. Fortunately, it didn't. But a power outage can jeopardize that sort of resource very quickly as well. So, for example, here they're saying, hospitals, you should have direct access to your electric company, your fire department. Maybe it's at home use, right? You should be letting people know this. This is for the user of the medical device. This isn't for the manufacturer of the medical device. Make sure you know what the plan is if the power goes out. But here's a thought. As device developers, should we be thinking about that? No, we shouldn't be spending a lot more time and effort to plan for the next hurricane. That's not the responsibility of the medical device developer. But my goodness, 15 minutes just thinking about how will this be used in that kind of an emergency would be a great thing for public health. So, if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, if you're listening to this and you haven't thought about this, I'd encourage you, when you're thinking about power distribution, how does this thing run, what kind of batteries am I going to use, it's also worth asking the question, how would this work in a power outage, even if we're not going to plan for that as a primary use case? Water contamination. So many medical devices use water, need water, and the hospital is normally able to provide that. What's going to happen if you're in coastal areas that have water supplies that can get contaminated when tidal surges come over? Well, they've got some recommendations for it. But again, I think this is something that from the development standpoint could use some thought as well. If we require liquids or saline or purified water in the use of the device, are there any recommendations for this? It could be something that would actually be really, really helpful. So again, if FDA is going to think about it, maybe worth just putting in a few thoughts from the standpoint of the development community. Sterility, of course, you're hoping that your sterile barriers are still good, that they weren't destroyed by some kind of physical violence to the packaging. but something else to think about there. And along with sterility, reuse. Of course, N95 masks were the prime example of this during COVID, but in different types of crises, what is needing reuse could be could vary dramatically. And so that's another place, is what kind of reuse can be done. Again, from a developer's standpoint, you're not expecting it to be reused, but what if it were? Now, you can't necessarily go and say this device is suitable for reuse. That's not going to be appropriate because it's not a claim you're prepared to make if you made it single use. So this one is probably more on the hospitals to ask, what is our strategy? Even if we're not going to stockpile, even if we're not going to absolutely prep for an unknown event, could we ask the question, what does reuse look like? Which of our single-use devices might we be willing to take the risk of reuse on? We were forced to in COVID. Could we do some pre-thinking about that for a future type of crisis? Now, this last one, the fifth one, is one that I found really interesting, dealing with heat and humidity. It is often the case that places subject to things like hurricanes and flooding are often in our country. They can be further down south, further on the coast, and oftentimes they do have higher temperatures, more humidity. This creates an interesting problem because when we specify the requirements for a medical device, we're often thinking it's going to be used in an office environment. It's going to be used in a place that's got air conditioning. And so we don't bother to do a lot of development work around ensuring that it can work at temperature extremes. But this is the aspect of natural disasters that I found most interesting, because heat and humidity come through the door the minute that AC goes off, right? And if you find yourself in a situation where a disaster still allows you to work, but you don't have those the HVAC system, this one could get really interesting really quickly. What effect do heat and humidity have? Because you've basically gone from a normal healthcare setting to a field hospital. You didn't design it for military use. You didn't design it for field use. And yet there you are pretty quickly in that situation. And this is the kind of thing we saw during COVID. We saw, outside things being set up. We saw the preparation of field hospitals. And we know those kind of things happen during hurricanes, right? People get displaced very quickly. So this is actually some welcome thinking from FDA. And again, I think it applies in two ways. One way that it applies is to the hospitals and the healthcare systems, to say what steps could we take to be ready for natural disasters, especially if we're in areas of the country where that kind of a thing tends to happen. But also for those of us who are engaged in development of medical devices, whether we're startups, whether we're mentors, whether we're investors, to at least ask the question, not to spend a ton of time, but to at least ask the question, even if we're not responsible for disaster use of our product, is there anything at all that we can do to make it more suitable for that? Now, if you need a bottom line on that, right, like everything has a bottom line, why on earth would you want to do something like that? Well, I think we saw during COVID, there was really a premium for devices that could work under the circumstances that we found ourselves in. And the same is true during other types of natural disasters. So if you can't bring yourself to do it for the good of humanity, maybe at least realize that putting just a little bit of thought in there would give you another item on the marketing sheet, that the device at least has been thought of for use in a situation like that, and there are communications that can be had to enable the continued use of the device under disaster circumstances. Sad we have to think that way, but I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this, so kudos to FDA for actually asking the question, hey, wait, what other natural disasters happen on a regular basis that maybe we should put some thought into? So it's kind of an encouraging document. Look forward to any thoughts you may have about that, or your stories for usage. Of course, during COVID, lots of listeners to the show having done work in this area of how do we get devices quickly to people that are going to work under the circumstances. Let's talk about jobs. The job market, wow, it's hard to hire people these days. I don't know what everyone's doing, on vacation or something, but here's the deal. FDA is trying very hard to hire, and we just wanted to take a minute to look at some of the kinds of things that CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, is looking for at the moment. Here's the top-level view. Chemists, biologists, microbiologists. Chemists, you're looking for a new role. Scientists, physicians, veterinarians, engineers, and statisticians. Policy analysts and regulatory counsel. Health communication specialists and government information specialists. Health scientists, scientific project managers, senior data analysts, data architects, IT program managers. They got like pretty much all the kinds of things that you would have if you were in a company. They're also looking for the mirror there at FDA. Let's click on one of these and just see what pops up here. So, what would make somebody a good policy analyst? Somebody who could draft guidance documents, write supporting statements for the Federal Register, lead working groups, analyze public comments. So, in other words, give fodder for the agency to think about what their policy should be and to communicate it. They would love to have some law expertise. They would love to have interpretation of policies and procedures, expertise, ability to manage complex information, and lead working groups. So there's an example of a role that FDA is looking for. Let's click on another one. Scientists, physicians, engineers, and statisticians. It's all about review of scientific data, consultation to industry, academic, and laboratory scientists, guideline writing and evaluation. So again, this is more from the technical side. Here's an important one. I know some people would just love to be on the other side of this equation right now, but this one right here, suggest changes to clinical trial protocols. Right, so oftentimes folks that we work with will get to FDA and FDA will say, hey, we don't think you're doing your trial or your testing correctly. We don't think you're doing your clinical trials correctly. These are the people who make those kinds of suggestions. Here's how this should be tested differently. Specialties that they're looking for. For scientists, they're looking for biologists, chemists, computer scientists, epidemiologists, general scientists, medical technologists, microbiologists, physicists, and toxicologists. For physicians, they're looking for critical care, dermatology, general hospital, infectious disease, internal medicine, neurology, ophthalmology, orthopedic surgery, and urology. And for engineering, they're looking for AI, biomed, chemical, computer, electrical, human factors, materials, metallurgy, mechanical, polymer, software, and systems. Pretty much everything, although the physician one seemed the most limited to me. There's some really specifics that they're looking for. So again, FDA is out there looking. We won't go through all of these, but we thought it's worth mentioning because some people find themselves, in between jobs or thinking about what their next move is, and maybe you want to get involved in medical technology and you're not involved. Would going and working for FDA for a few years be a good step? It might be. There's got cybersecurity specialists, et cetera. So lots of openings there. There's a link to the CDRH career opportunities through USA Jobs and STEM career opportunities as well as fellowships. But if of interest, have a look or pass on to somebody who might be interested. This one is fascinating. This may require some more thinking and a consortium. I think I know a lot of people who would be interested in getting on FDA's radar with respect to this. So let's go back a couple years first. FDA took a while, I would say, to get on the page of like, hey, maybe healthcare should be delivered in different settings. And of course, with the rise of telehealth, but it didn't really get pushed through until we experienced COVID. And now suddenly it's like, wait, people don't need to come to hospitals. We were consolidating. All the little players are being bought up. Consolidation. And then suddenly it's like, wow, We don't have to deliver all of our healthcare through hospitals. In fact, what about home use? What about at-home use of medical technologies? I think it's really cool. It's a great question to be asking. And FDA is asking the question directly for public comment. This is something that they are asking us to go out and say something about. Here are the questions. How can FDA support the development of medical technologies? And they're interested in also especially in digital health technologies and diagnostics for use in non-clinical care settings such as at home. Here's a little hint. If you are a startup working on a home accessible digital health technology, I do not know why you would not be submitting something to FDA in their public comment. This is like an open door to go to FDA and pave the way for what you're trying to do. I hope you're honest about it. I hope you're straightforward. I hope you paint the entire picture. But if you're not telling them the kinds of things that you think are so important that you're working on, this would be just a big missed opportunity. So, public comment on how can FDA support the development of medical technologies for use in non-clinical care settings. Goes deeper, though. What factors should be considered to effectively institute patient care that includes home-based care? What are the metrics? How do you decide that whatever it was you were doing was worthwhile? How do you measure that? What factors are there? What sorts of things do you need available to make it feasible? And then we talked about this previous week. What kinds of ways can digital health technologies foster the conduct of clinical trials remotely? So distributed clinical trials. How do we support that? Hey, maybe the PIs of the trial, the sponsors and PIs of the trial, aren't located there. It's not the major healthcare system right in their backyard. But maybe some doctors get involved and can facilitate, even though they wouldn't normally be involved in a clinical trial. Maybe your primary care physician can be part of administering a clinical trial locally so that you don't have to travel to the major regional center to participate in some kind of an experimental treatment. If you have ideas about how this can work, FDA is asking. As well as access for remote locations. If people are unable or unwilling to access care in clinical settings, really the question is how can we make this as easy as possible to get things to people where they are, not forcing them to come in to a central location. So we're doing it. There's always a pendulum swing. Consolidation, and now FDA themselves are asking, how do we push this back? How do we make things more accessible without having to travel to a single location? I kind of wonder, I wonder if Amazon is not part of that. I'm sure they'll get involved, but I think the distribution of things, the logistics and distribution, now it's almost like you can just get anything delivered to your door. And it seems to be persisting. That seems to have not gone away. It seemed like overkill, 3-4 years ago. And now it's happening. So I wonder how much those two worlds are coming together there. Next thing you know, we're going to see FDA/Amazon facilities popping up all over the place. I probably shouldn't have said that, should I have, Steve? I mean, I don't want to predict that as an outcome.
I don't think any of us want that as an outcome.
Amazon is my healthcare provider. Opinions expressed are strictly my own and not those of Medtech Crossroads or Intubeing. Had to say that. Okay. What processes and medical procedures, including diagnostics, do you believe would be ideal for transitioning? Oh, this is a good one. This is actually a really good one. Transitioning from hospital to non-clinical care settings. Oftentimes people are dumped on their ear. We know this, right? Like you're being taken care of at the hospital and then you go home and now you've got to get a visiting nurse or something to happen, and it's hard to arrange that and it costs money, and then you end up staying longer in the hospital because we just can't take care of you at home. How can that process be made better? Wow, there's probably a startup that needs to be formed just around that one. Maybe it already exists. Maybe someone's going to hear this and be like, hey, we're that startup that exists. Love to hear from you. That would be a really cool thing. What design attributes and user needs would facilitate these things for use in non-clinical settings? And this is kind of like what we were just talking about, right? Like you can do some thought that may not be strictly necessary about what would happen if a natural disaster came. You can spend 15 minutes thinking about that, and maybe it'll inform something. By the same token, you can ask that for home use. Think, is there anything we do for this device that makes it easier to use in a home use or non-clinical context? A lot of times, development teams will take shortcuts because it's going to be used in a hospital, and the hospital's air conditioned, and the hospital's being used by the device is being used by trained staff. But that can be a little bit of a shortcut. It's not always fair because training staff takes time and it's error prone. And if the device needs trained staff, well, that means that you're going to have to wait for the right person to get there to do the thing. So there's all sorts of benefits from thinking about how do you reduce the burden on the user? How do you make the device more usable? Diverse patient populations, that's an important one. Is there anything about the patient population that makes the device usable or not usable? And then data analysis, evidence generation, etc., for using these in different contexts. So FDA is asking some great questions here. Excited that they are asking this. Again, they're not specifying. They're actually asking. So public comment, if you would like to be part of that, there's this docket number, FDA 2023N1956. You can go to regulations.gov and there's a questions email here, CDRH Health Equity at fda.hhs.gov. And you can link to this page from the YouTube comments, not the comments, the description, and you'll be able to get to this public comment page that we are just showing you right here. All right, finally, this will be a short one. I just want to show you that FDA has made updates to the Q submission program guidance, most recently issued. Oh, look at that, today. So this is something that probably requires more thought and more time than we're going to spend on it today. But they've updated it. There are also examples, and this is worth not missing. What is a Q-sub? We've talked about it before. We'll just mention briefly here. It's a communication with FDA that's free to the submitter. It can be in the form of pre-submissions, submission issue requests, study risk determinations, informational meetings, and some other types that are available. It's often used as you're approaching an FDA clearance submission to ask questions about it. It's not as flexible as something like the breakthrough device pathway, where you actually have sprint discussions with FDA. But it's a wonderful program. It's being highly utilized. And people are just eating it up. So they're making changes, making improvements to it. Just want you to know that there is this new guidance out there if you're interested in doing a Q-sub. Anything you have in a file folder somewhere is not the latest as of today. There are examples down in the appendices, which might be fun just to take a quick look at. For first of all, the acceptance checklist. But this is what I wanted to show you right here. Example pre-sub questions. Here's the thing. You don't go to FDA and say, hey FDA, what should I do? FDA will tell you to go read guidance documents and go to their website because they have a lot of stuff there. They will tell you to go to CDRH Learn. When you do a pre-sub, it's like going to office hours in school. It's always better if you come with specific questions, and they're required for a pre-submission. What are the most valuable questions for feedback? Request specific feedback on a provided proposal. Tell the FDA what you're going to do and ask them their thoughts on it. Have considered and include references to applicable guidance documents, standards, and previous discussions with FDA. Clearly articulate a desired outcome, including indications for use or labeled uses. You are not going to FDA and saying, hey, FDA, what can we sell this for? You're saying to them, we want to sell it for this. We've considered all these guidances and standards. This is what we're planning to do. What do you think about it? That's how you enter a pre-sub. And you want to do it in a timely manner to inform future device development and submission preparation. It does no good to do all your work and then submit a pre-sub and say to FDA, what do you think about what we did? You could have just submitted the 510K or the de novo at that point. So much better to get that in at the right time, which is enough time for them to come back, give you feedback, and say, hey, here's how this is, how we're going to respond to this. Then you still have time, change your design, change your testing. Here's some example questions. Will an investigational device exemption that includes results from the proposed testing be approved? Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. Not recommended. These are the bad ones. Yeah, I was like, this doesn't sound good. I wouldn't have asked FDA that. We need to go back and study more. Yeah, not open-ended. Will it be approved? They're not going to answer that. This is a non-binding opinion from FDA. They will answer that in the 510K. They will answer that in the de novo, but not in a pre-sub. Don't request a formal regulatory determination. Is my device a Class 2 medical device? Well, they're not going to answer that in a pre-sub. And not providing data, we've seen people make this mistake where it's like, hey, we're going to convince FDA in this pre-sub. We have to totally convince them that our device is safe and effective. It's also not the point of a pre-sub. The point of a pre-sub is to go out there and simply get FDA's feedback about what you're going to submit to them. It's in that actual submission, the 510K or the de novo or another submission, that you're going to actually provide the data, make the arguments, and ask, hey, can we have clearance? Here's productive questions. Is the proposed predicate device appropriate if we demonstrate substantial equivalence? It's all conditional, right? They're not asking, we did this and we need you to approve it right now. They're saying, hey, would this path work? We'd like to obtain FDA's feedback and guidance on pursuing a de novo request, because we don't know of any predicate devices out there. Hey, FDA, do you think that, or do you agree that clinical data is likely not needed to support what we just showed you and what we're planning to do? And so on and so forth. These are all contained in the document. You can get to it through the YouTube link in the description of the YouTube video from today. I want to take just a moment also and show you, trying to link these things up better and better. So I'll take just a minute and then we'll come back to the iPad here. But we have a video on this also that was done a few years ago. We're just going to try to find it. A few years ago, I believe it was our own Rick Routson did a pre-sub video for like the basics of it, and it's one that has been well received. Got to bring that down so we're not playing ads for everybody on the show. But yeah, this one, we won't watch the whole thing here. You can get to it. We will put the link on the YouTube page. But this is a video from a couple of years ago called "A Drop of FDA Pre-Sub." And Intubing's own Rick Routson took us through this. I would definitely recommend it for your viewing pleasure if you're interested in the Q-sub process, specifically pre-subs pursuant to 510Ks or de novos. So we will have that link in the description of the YouTube video. But that is the pre-sub video from the droplet videos from a few years back from Intubing before Medtech Crossroads, before even COVID Connect. So hope you enjoy that. And we'll link those two together so that both this session and the one on pre-subs from a few years ago are connected. Well, that is about our news today. We're going to just check Zoom and check YouTube really quick to see if there are any hands raised. We're always happy to answer any questions you may have. Thankful to all of our listeners today. Feel free to raise a hand if anybody does have one. Checking one, checking the other. And I don't see any questions. We sure appreciate those of you who are watching live, and all of those of you who will watch once this thing is posted on YouTube. It's been great to see those numbers going up and people subscribing. Feel free to do the like and subscribe thing. Go ahead and hit us up on YouTube there, because we'd love to get this out to more and more people. We keep having people come back to us and say, thank you for that. You've educated me. You taught me something, and that's our goal. That's all we're looking for here, is to get the word out about how to think about FDA, how to think about startups, how to think about product development, how to think about the community that we all exist in, right? These topics that we're talking about, it doesn't matter whether you're a startup, an entrepreneur, an investor, a manufacturer, somebody involved in the community as a mentor, whatever it may be, a healthcare worker, right? A healthcare provider. These things all come together. And what we're trying to do is create content that allows each person, no matter where they are around that table, to educate themselves, so that when we all get into a room together and say, like, what can we do? What would be good here? For example, I think we should all educate FDA about home use devices, like they're asking. Let's go talk to them. So some of you are probably going to get a link to this video from me saying, hey, let's do something about this that's bigger than just Medtech Crossroads. But that's about it for today. I appreciate you being here today on Medtech Crossroads with us. We will see you next week. Have a great and sunny week.